Hello and welcome to Note to File, a clinical research podcast.
A collection of interviews, candid commentary, and general nonsense for the clinical research community.
Check us out at notetofilepodcast.com.
And now, without further ado, on to the show.
All right, guys. Hello. Welcome to another Note to File live. Today is August 12th, 2025. How's it going, Denali?
It's good. It's wet here.
Yeah, we just got a bunch of rain here as well in Oklahoma.
It's been dumping in Wisconsin. So I don't know if you saw any of the news, but there was like massive flooding in Milwaukee. Like they had to close the state fair for the last day. And like, if you look, there's like videos of like the highway by Miller Park, AmFam Stadium now, the baseball stadium for the Brewers. Like the highway was just like absolutely completely underwater. So, which is not usual. We don't normally get like that type of rain in Wisconsin. So we're damp here. We're damp here.
Yeah, sounds like it. And where are people supposed to get their gigantic turkey legs if they're closing down the state fair?
So, no, the state fair. So the Wisconsin State Fair from a food perspective is off. Everything's deep fried. First off, there's that. We deep fry everything. But then there's a lot of just like beer, brats, and cream puffs. Those are the big ones.
And that sounds amazing. All right. Well, I want to welcome, to the stage here our guest, Dr. Manfred Stapff. I pretty much nailed that pronunciation, I assume. How are you doing, Doctor?
I'm doing very good. Thank you very much. Here in the Northeast, we have warm weather, a little bit humid, getting a little bit hotter, but I think we are still on the better side of the weather these days in the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it. What is hot really in the Northeast?
Oh, about 75, 80s. And
come on, man.
that's how you set your air condition to, yes.
Fair. Yeah, we were hitting, and we'll be back in the upper 90s here pretty soon. So I'm jealous. I'm jealous of the beautiful 70-degree weather. Well, very good. Let's. I'm going to start out like I do every show here, and Doctor, curious to hear a little bit about your background and sort of your experience through the clinical research world. I know you've also recently published a book, so tell us a little about yourself and kind of bring us up to date here, if you would.
Yeah, in the good old European tradition, I start from the beginning. I know that in America you start with the most recent activity, but I go with the timeline. I worked as a physician in Germany quite a long time ago in the German Air Force as a flight surgeon, and then in university clinic internal medicine. Became a little bit dissatisfied with the therapeutic options we had at that time. This was also the time when the HIV crisis started, and obviously there was not too much we could do for these patients. So this was one of many reasons which drove me to research to the pharmaceutical industry, to contribute a little bit, developing new therapies. First in the German subsidiary of Merck, then in Merck headquarters in the United States. So I'm in the United States since more than 20 years. Still have my awful German accent, so I apologize for that. This will not change. And got a few career steps, other companies, Forest, then converted into Allergan. And then something interesting happened. The 21st Century Cures Act more or less forced healthcare providers to use electronic medical records. And there were some startups, and one of the startups I became chief medical officer, realized the opportunity. And the pharmaceutical industry also realized that this is a good way to test protocols for feasibility, to check inclusion and exclusion criteria, to find sites, because suddenly you could look if such patients actually exist and where they exist. And as a physician, I also found other opportunities just to learn more about diseases, course of the diseases, safety and efficacy of treatments on a long term where clinical trials are just too expensive and too long to do. So this is an exciting area. And I stayed with that and tried to kind of support this area, and also wrote this book about real-world evidence, because then I realized it's not only in medicine, it's not only in clinical development, and it's not only the pharmaceutical industry, it's basically all of us. We are also bombarded every day with information, like the FDA is bombarded with information, and they need to see proof that a drug works and is safe. When we are bombarded with information, we also want to know, is this true? Is this a fake news? Is it a misinformation, disinformation? So one can apply similar methods and also the word real world evidence to our daily life and to what's going on in media and in social media. We all know that we should better check whether it's fake, whether it's manipulated, whether it comes only from the right side or only from the left side. So this book tries to cover both sides, the more pure drug development research side, but also the daily life media, social media side, because it's about looking for the truth, looking for evidence, and believing only things and reacting only to things which you have checked whether they have some facts behind it or some truth behind it. And it's exciting and it never stops.
Fair. Yeah. And if nothing else, it's also probably accelerated a lot over the last 5 years or so. So yeah, a lot of rabbit holes to go down there. And one I want to start with myself, I work at a clinical research site. So we're doing, phase 1 through 4 trials, collecting evidence, sort of run of the mill standard, randomized placebo-controlled trials. So I see a lot, read a lot about real world evidence, real world data. First of all, is there a difference between the two? And I mean, can you give us I feel like it's one of those things where I can't tell you what it is, but I think I kind of know what it is. So how would you sort of define that for people? The definition of real world data, real world evidence, are they different from one another?
And this is something I also had to learn. It's really different. I grew up in clinical development. I grew up with study protocols with 5 inclusion criteria and 25 exclusion criteria and visit intervals and standardized protocols.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I always had the feeling that me as a physician, this is not reality. I would never treat a patient like that, like in a clinical trial, with really compliance check, pill count, transportation from the home to the investigator site to keep the dropout rate low. So nothing is done in reality. And this was always an assumption. I would like to be a study patient. No patient is treated so well and so preferably in a study site like a study patient.
100%,
they get their little senator cards, their golden platinum cards. They don't have to wait. They are treated by nice nurses and study assistants and by the investigator, and they immediately get their bottle with the pills and everything. Nothing happens in real life, and studies have a dropout rate. So how may it be in real life? So then when I checked that with real world data, with the inclusion and exclusion criteria, then I found that the population alone, not even talking about the procedures in the study, but only the population, is so selected, optimized for efficacy and also optimized for safety. And this has nothing to do with cheating. It's just for safety. In a phase 2 study, of course, you want to exclude risk patients.
Yeah.
You want to exclude the elderly. You want to exclude the potentially pregnant people or lactating people. So, of course, for safety. But if you apply that in real life, then you see that a study population perhaps only represents perhaps a 10% selected population of those people who will later have the diagnosis and take the drug.
So that almost to me seems somewhat unethical, right? Like you're testing and saying, yes, we're putting this to market. You can't be on it. And then now we're giving it to everyone. Like, is there a concern there?
I wouldn't go that far because the
Okay.
ethical side is, as I said, it is not in order to cheat,
Yeah.
but it's in order to apply on the efficacy side the best science possible, and on the safety side, the safest way possible, because you have a drug of which you don't know what it does, to be honest. So you really have to exclude a lot of patients. But if I was sitting at the FDA, one could discuss, I would go through all the exclusion criteria and would give them as a contraindication. Because I would say you don't have data on these people. You don't have data of people above 80 years of age. You have no data on pregnant people. You don't have data on people who could become pregnant. You don't have all this. So I give you all your exclusion criteria as a contraindication.
Mm.
This would educate the pharmaceutical industry a
Yeah.
little bit, saying
Yeah,
phase 2 is really pure experiment, science, safe, ideal population.
Hmm.
Phase 3 is as close to reality as possible, so you can provide to the FDA the most realistic picture of what happens. Very often there is a copy and paste situation from phase 2 to phase 3, not only in the eligibility criteria, but also in the study procedures, in the visit interval, in the outcome criteria. Still, the procedures are very different from what happens in real life. Also, the compliance test, the pill count. Why doing that in phase 3? Nobody does this in reality.
Yeah.
Just give you an example, GLP-1 agonist, big hype.
Hmm.
First for diabetes, then for obesity. Now we have even 4-year data for cardio prevention, prevention of stroke, of myocardial infarction in a study. It's already a huge effort to have patients staying for 4 years in a study. And then if you look at the real world data, how are the GLP-1 agonists taken? After half a year, you have only 50% of the patients taking it anymore. After 1 year, you have between 30 and 40%. So the benefit which is measured in the study after 4 years doesn't even show up because the patients don't stay that long. Of course, because they would have to pay for their GLP, or they would have to convince the insurance to take it, to take the costs, obviously. So you're losing this. For the individual patient, one would say, it's your benefit if you take it for 4 years. It may be your benefit if you drop out. It's your lack of benefit. However, in a general system, in the healthcare system, where we calculate risk and benefit and also healthcare costs, the benefits for the healthcare system in terms of reducing myocardial infarctions, they will never show up in reality, because you do not have this benefit overall in the healthcare system after 4 years. So this is just one example. This was already a little bit very much research focused and medical focused. If I had to explain it to a layperson who has no idea about drug development, I usually love to quote the Volkswagen diesel scandal. And I don't know whether you have heard about it, but
I remember
of
that.
course, as a German, I have to tell this. So, as a car driver, when you drive your car, in reality, you usually have a higher gasoline consumption than what you see in the window sticker. Because the car companies, they have their experiments, they have the laboratory, they check the fuel consumption, they check the cleanliness of the exhaust system and so on. And this has not too much to do, despite there are standardized experimental driving cycles, still we have our own style of acceleration, braking. There is weather, there is wind, there is temperature, everything is different. And so in reality, we have a higher gasoline consumption. Volkswagen did a little bit more. because these tests are not only measuring gasoline consumption, but also the exhaust, CO2 and the nitroxide and all these other poisons in the exhaust. And also you can drive very clean or you can drive very dirty. So if the car computer realized that the car is standing in an experimental laboratory, the wheels are turning, but the car is not moving, then the car knew, hey, I'm in an experiment. I change my engine to the cleanest and most saving way possible. And that's how they created the clean diesel, which never ever happens in reality. And they did it intentionally. They paid some penalty for it. I think some even had to go to prison. I'm not 100% sure. In clinical trials, that's also what we are doing. The patient knows that the patient is in a clinical trial because we have to, for legal and ethical reasons, we have to go through an informed consent process. So the patient knows, oh, they are supervised. We call that the Hawthorne effect. Patients behave differently when they know that they are observed. This goes back, it's a fascinating, we can discuss about it by 5 bottles of wine in the evening, because it goes down to Werner Heisenberg, who said that science is never 100% perfect. You cannot measure a process without interfering into the process, because just by measuring, you interfere it.
And, with even like the dual or the photon slit experiments that they did, where they saw the same thing. Like if you're observing it, it does something different than when you're not observing it.
Exactly. So we can never expect 100% exactness in science, because science is already, by the existence of science, is already interfering. If we want to look for water on the moon, we put some rockets on the moon. The rocket exhaust contains water vapor. So we have already brought water to the moon.
You've changed the conditions.
Yeah, but that's if the moon landing isn't a conspiracy. So
that's a different podcast.
You can actually, if you read my book, of course, you will see what can you do to find out where the moon landing was.
Perfect. Good.
Like that. We'll make sure we put a link in our show notes.
Yeah, we will.
To the book. Well, and so then, this, of course, starts, and I've seen this too at the site level. Like we do even phase 3 trials where the exclusion criteria are so restrictive that I'm like, if this gets approved based off of this criteria, how there's no way they're not going to also prescribe that drug to patients outside that criteria. How are we supposed to know if someone with a BMI over 30, as an example, criteria says less than 30, if they give this drug to people with criteria over 30, how do we know what the results will be? And that's always bothered me a little bit at the site level, because we are testing on these very, to your point, it's not cheating. I guess they are trying to they're trying to minimize the noise, right? To make sure they're getting an effect or not getting an effect. But how does that translate? I know we've seen examples of drugs being approved only to find later that they have, maybe results that we did not expect. And in some ways even, extremely harmful for people. So, is the model itself a little bit broken? And is something like real world evidence something that could be instituted earlier or broader? Or I guess I'm curious to know too, like to what degree is real world data used to monitor, newly approved drugs now?
Yeah, definitely we need more real world data. I think currently you can get a drug approved purely on phase 2 and phase 3 studies. So purely on experimental data, from which we all know that they do not represent the population and also the procedures and how patients are taking it. Interestingly, here is where science and ideology and politics come together, because ideology and politics always tells us, or at least since a few years tells us, oh, minorities are underrepresented, black people are underrepresented, lower socioeconomic status persons are underrepresented. So here, there's the ideologic interest to get more diversity into clinical trials. And many vendors, of course, try to make some marketing-related expressions out of that. Yeah, we bring diversity into clinical trials, and whenever you had the word diversity in a publication in the headline, it got immediately accepted. So this was the more ideologically tainted vision about diversity and representation. You do not even have to go to ideology. You can look at the science and can just compare and say clinical study patients are much more often male, are much more often white, have much more often a higher socioeconomic standard, because many studies also require, you have to be proficient in the language, you have to read, you have to be able to fill out the questionnaire. And also many study sites are in areas where perhaps the middle class is living, because there's a medical practice or a hospital where it makes sense to create a bigger site center, where other areas where the lower class is living, nobody wants to open a clinical site there.
Yeah.
So there are many, many factors in there. And therefore, clinical studies, experimental situations are not representative. A model would be to find ways, and I'm sure that smart AI people and smart statisticians could find calculation ways to extrapolate the experimental results to the population in the real world.
Yeah.
It's certainly possible. So this would be one way to do that. It's an extrapolation, as always. An extrapolation has some uncertainty. Or what we have seen with COVID, where there was an urgent need for a vaccine, that there is a preliminary approval with the mandatory market observation of real-world data in terms of efficacy and safety. This would be perhaps revolutionary, but pharma and regulatory rules and guidelines have not a reputation of being very revolutionary. I'm doing that since 25 years or so. Sometimes a little bit electronic stuff changes. Yeah, we have the internet. Yeah, nice. We have smartphones. Yeah, we have smart watches. But we are basically, since 25 years, doing pretty much the same thing compared to other industries which have totally been revolutionized. But one could think about phase 1 for clinical pharmacology, phase 2 for pivotal trials and the pure scientific experiment. Then you get conditional approval. It can become marketed with the mandatory observation of real-world data, which then have to be reported to the FDA let's say 1 year later or 2 years later, and then the approval can be revised or corrected or finalized. Sort of similar like with the COVID vaccines. Vaccines is not necessarily the best model, but the overall thinking, let's go step by step. If you want to be 100% sure after phase 3, meaning this is too hard. Before that, you cannot have it on the market at all. And after that, you can have it on the market basically for everybody, whatever the indications say. There is no transition in between. And I think we should introduce something like this transition in between preliminary approval, preliminary going to the market, with mandatory observation, with mandatory real-world evidence analysis, safety, side effects, efficacy, long-term outcome, all these things you can only do with realistic costs and realistic duration with real-world data, not with a clinical trial. Even if you do a 5 years clinical trial or a 10 years clinical trial, it sounds like a heroic effort, and I applaud everybody who managed to do that. But it's still a clinical study. It's still patients who stay in this study for some reasons, and these reasons you do not necessarily find in big percentage in the general population. So this would be something to think about.
So what do you think would be the barriers for adopting that? Because I personally think that's, I mean, I know I've had a couple conversations about this before, but how it should be like there should be mandatory post-market testing, because you're having so many patients who are taking these drugs. Or I mean I've been a patient in that scenario where like I was pregnant and I got sick, and they're like, well, we don't know how this works in pregnant women because we haven't tested it. And I was like, well, that's not reassuring. But there's no plan to. There's no like process for that to happen. So I mean, I think it's a phenomenal concept, but what do you think is the barrier to why we haven't adopted something like that?
I don't know whether barrier is a good definition, because it sounds like something negative. I can very well understand why people in the pharmaceutical industry are careful. I can understand why regulators are very careful. I can understand why they want to have the most efficacious and the most safe drug only on the market. And if they see something which may be a little bit of a red flag, they immediately react to that. That's actually good. It keeps us and the patient safe. But if you overdo it, of course, then it also reduces the opportunities. It's really the challenge to find a middle ground somehow. And this good old saying, when I came to America, I learned no risk, no fun. Obviously, let's modify that. A little bit of prudent risk needs to be allowed if you are doing it under observed conditions and can immediately stop that. If you find that the risk is not acceptable anymore. So this kind of staggered approval process would perhaps be a way to do it. And today with the new administration is shaking everything what's out there. Just imagine, since how long are they now? In 200 days or something? Yeah, not even a year.
Sure,
everything is upside down. And
Uh-huh.
whenever things are upside down, it's a very good opportunity to make changes which are perhaps overdue since many, many years. And the current, and I do not want to support any political direction. I'm just saying, if you are renovating stuff, sometimes you make your renovations relatively dramatic, and then they are really effective. But fact is, we are doing the same thing since 25 years. So now would be a good opportunity to make it significantly different. Even there is the saying out there, we create a new gold standard in research. Okay, that's a little bit of a political saying, but I could imagine that the gold standard in research is now the experiment in a clinical study setting, together combined with real world data. And this combined study or this combined project, the real world data confirm that the experimental go into the same direction. They don't have to be identical. There have been initiatives out there to check whether real world data bring the same result in a clinical study. It doesn't have to, because it's different. We are talking about the difference between experiment and reality. We are talking about in this half hour. Of course, you cannot expect the same result, but it should go into the same direction.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to use this as a little bit of a segue too, because I think you hit on some things that made me think. And again, we execute these trials at a site level. I get to kind of see what goes into doing a clinical trial. I get to see into inclusion exclusion criteria. So when I see news reports, when I see headlines, even I'm like, let me go read a little bit about this, because we live in a world now where things are not always accurate, or not always displayed in a way that's fair and balanced. And then, obviously we had COVID, which I think probably accelerated a lot of the misinformation, or however you want to say. But I mean, I guess talk to us a little bit about misinformation, what we can trust, what we can't trust, how to discern the difference between the two. I think even medical professionals are having difficulty at times when it comes to sort of discerning what's true and what's not. Again, I know as soon as I see a headline, I go try to find the paper and read it, and figure out what were the inclusion and exclusion criteria, what were the variables, what were the controls, what are the I'm not a stats guy, but what can be done statistically to potentially make this sound different. So this seems to be an increasing problem, as things go on. I mean, it's always been a problem to some degree, but it seems like it's really ramped up when things have become a little bit more politicized over the last half decade or so.
Yeah, I agree. And in my opinion, one big contributor to this issue is just the factor of speed. News and headlines, and this is in cable TV, it's in social media, accumulate and distribute extremely high speed. So it's high speed. It is also limitation or compression. You cannot have a headline of, let's say, 3 or 4 lines explaining relatively exactly what the issue is and what the result is. Even if you write it in an abstract, is relatively compressed. But headlines have to be very short, and headlines have to be emotional, and headlines have to immediately trigger a reaction in those people who read it. In social media, the reaction is usually that they click somewhere. So if you simplify something in a very, very short sentence, of course, content gets lost. So if you want to evaluate whether this is true, whether this is fact, or whether this is manipulated or misinformation, or even intentional disinformation, then you have to spend time. And this time which you spend is dominated more or less by the speed of your brain. So the electronic speed has multiplied and accelerated in the past few years dramatically. But the speed of thinking of our brain did not really change, did not significantly change over the past 10 or 100,000 years. We are a little bit better. We have perhaps better methods to research. We can Google things. We can ask ChatGPT what they think and what kind of sources ChatGPT can provide. 50 years ago, we had to go into the library. So we have better tools now, but still our mental capacity, our thinking process, our conclusion making and translating it into an answer in social media or in a decision what we are doing has the same speed as hundreds and thousands of years ago. And this discrepancy between the speed of us possible to evaluate a message and the social media speed of distributing a message, this discrepancy becomes larger and larger. The only thing what we can do, we can kind of relax a little bit and read something and look for the source and look who wrote this, what kind of credential has the author of this. Is this a real journalist or is this an influencer? What is the source? Very often you have to go source by source by source because the first source you find is also a secondary or tertiary. So go to the basis. And then when you find the original statistics or this original publication or the original somewhere in New England Journal of Medicine or somewhere, then you have to read it. So everything takes time. So it's basically impossible to within 1 minute click on like or click on forward or write quickly a comment, uninformed comment. This system is not necessarily supporting the truth. It is supporting the rumors, it's supporting the misinformation, it's supporting the manipulation. Because every time when we comment on something and another one reads the comment and writes another comment, everybody, this individual author of a comment, adds their own opinion and their own interpretation. I don't know whether you had this in America. We had it as kids in Germany. We had a game. We called it Silent Mail. So one kid whispers to another kid into the ear a story. And
we call
then
it telephone.
Yeah.
You call it, yeah, you have
Telephone.
it. So telephone. Okay, so the kid, it goes 5, 6 kids, but it doesn't even need 6 kids. After the third kid, the story is already
crazy,
totally different. Of course, these are kids and they have fun and they have a fantasy. But sometimes, are we smarter than kids in working in social media?
I mean, I've managed people before, and no, the general people are exactly like children.
Yes, so you see.
No, but there is a principle. I don't know what it's called, but yeah, the time and energy and burden of arguing a false claim is so much higher than just making false claims, which, is extremely unfortunate because anyone can rifle off 10 lies, but it takes a ton of time to actually go refute and, effectively refute and research and prove those things to be wrong. And unfortunately, the system is gamed to do that, to just rifle those off before anybody can even make heads or tails of it. I'm curious too, like, what could be the role of AI, for example, in either, is it a friend or foe, I guess, when it comes to this? Can it help, sort of sift through the garbage, or is it only going to just take what it's being fed, which is oftentimes
garbage?
Yeah, oftentimes garbage. We're going to get garbage in, garbage out, or is it going to become a tool?
Yeah, very good trigger words. Trigger word AI. This would be another bottle of wine to have a long evening discussion with good music and good people. We should have that. And also the garbage in, garbage out is also an extremely good trigger word, because that's what happened with AI. Going back to pharmaceutical companies, if they now take AI to analyze and learn from their clinical trial data, of course, they get the same bias, they get the same shift of population characteristics as they have in clinical trials. The analysis may be a different one, maybe a different hypothesis, maybe for different reasons, but the population and the data which they take into their AI, of course, have the same non-representative or the same biased character. So AI is something really, it's a wonderful thing on the one hand if you use it correctly, but it can also be very, very dangerous. I mean, the super extremes are obviously that there have been lawyers who wrote the whole submission to the court in ChatGPT, copied it and pasted it and delivered it the next morning. And there were fake cases, hallucinated cases, fake laws. And of course, smart judges see that and say, you are losing your bar registration. Of course, this is something you cannot do. I like to use it when I'm still not a native English speaker and perhaps not the best English writer. So then I ask ChatGPT, how would you express if someone says this and that and that? What is a better English wording? And then you get this wonderful professional reply from ChatGPT. This is also something ChatGPT answers in such, at least for me as a non-native English speaker, in such a perfect, authoritative way that the way how it's written, you must believe it. This is almost the same like if someone uses a very expressive body language. The body language is also a part of the message, and it increases the credibility of the message. If you look at some politicians, how they are able to use their body language and do this and everything, it's not my way of talking, but how much this increases the credibility just because of the visual channel. And in ChatGPT is obviously nothing visual. Perhaps sooner or later it will come and there will be perhaps an artificial video who talks to you.
It's a paperclip.
Yeah. But apparently we don't have that. But ChatGPT talks in a very authoritative style if you ask something. For me, it's a good way to research. Give me the source for that. Isn't there a publication about that? And then I get the source. So it makes my research much, much easier. However, one has to be really, really careful. ChatGPT can hallucinate. And this is apparently a consequence of the algorithm, how this thing works, that it can create a reality which does not exist. If we have 2 minutes, I can tell the story. When I was chief medical officer of Trinetics in Cambridge, we had a lot of discussion about anonymity and patient data privacy, and hackers may be able to identify your electronic medical records. And it actually happened in Massachusetts when a Massachusetts governor had a car accident or bicycle accident, broke a few bones, and was then hospitalized. And this information was, of course, in the press. And an MIT student took the press information with a publicly available voter registry and could identify the medical records and basically download them, and didn't do anything bad with it, just send it to the governor's office and say, here, just in case you need them, here you are, your medical records. So we were discussing that, and for my book, I wanted to describe that under the chapter data privacy. But I could not remember the name of this governor. So I asked ChatGPT, and this can happen. I mean, my brain is getting a little bit older, and sometimes you know that you know this, and you cannot get it out. So it was exactly the situation. So I asked ChatGPT, who was the governor who had an accident, was hospitalized, and then his medical records were hacked and published. And then I got a name, Patakis, George Dukakis, was Massachusetts governor in the Clinton area, Clinton time. But I knew, no, I'm not talking about that one. And I asked the same question once more, because I know from quality management that consistency is also a quality characteristic. And I got another name for the same question. Forgot the name again. So, and the fourth time I got 4 different names. So either the system is totally unstable, and this consistency test is a very, very famous quality test. The same input should always get the same output. Slight modifications of the input should give the output which represents the slight modification. For example, if I change in the input men to women, then the output should reflect that, if there is a difference in reality. So in my case, I got 4 different names. So my consequence is only, so either the system is totally unstable, or every Massachusetts governor always has a bicycle accident and always gets hospitalized and always an MIT student hacks into the medical records.
It's probably the latter. I think I've heard that, I think.
So yeah, so an AI topic would be a topic for a whole other discussion about the advantages, the disadvantages, the risks, the potential pitfalls, and how we, as let's say normal users, we are most likely not computer freaks, not statisticians, but normal users, how we can use it to the best fit for purpose intentions.
And so, yeah, that also, I mean, another little segue into probably another multi-bottle of wine topic, if you will. But I guess talk to me a little bit about data ownership and, democratization. If we're talking about, it's always occurred to me, we're talking about real world evidence, real world data. These are patients' medical records, right? And so in order to do anything, we need access to a bunch of patients' medical records to be surveilled or tokenized or whatever the soup of the day is. And how is that managed? I mean, I assume these patients, you're not consenting millions of patients at a time to look at their medical records. You're obviously using their data to potentially, do something valuable. Who owns it? Do they have a right to it? I guess it seems like there's a lot of ethical gray areas here that come up with the real world evidence. Maybe I'm wrong, but that seems to be how it, what I assume. So I guess talk to me a little bit about that. Like, what does that potentially look like? What does it look like now? And I guess what could it look like in the future?
Yeah, it's a very important topic because it's also a matter of trust in data privacy, trust also from the patients themselves. These are my data, my laboratory values, my diagnosis. How can I trust that this data are not sold to the profit pharmaceutical industry and all this kind of stuff? So, and the trust obviously needs to be worked on, and trust can only be created with reliable information. One has to be transparent what happens. And one also is allowed to try to convince patients that your data are safe. But perhaps we are not doing the best job in that. One first answer is when real world data are used for medical research or even for the pharmaceutical industry to test their study protocols or the representativity of the population. They are always anonymized and aggregated. So each identifier is removed, but then these are not individual data sets anymore. These are aggregated data sets. And we were also discussing a lot about what would be the appropriate number. First, we started with 5, meaning if the results are a smaller group than 5, then perhaps the group of 5 is too small, and you can perhaps with other methods find out who is who. We increased that to 10. 10 is perhaps a good compromise between scientific value, especially in rare diseases, because some rare diseases, you have only 10 patients in the United States.
Right.
But one can certainly discuss that. So the pharmaceutical industry gets only the results which are summarized and aggregated of minimum of 10 people, meaning a mean value or standard deviation or other stuff, or the distribution of diagnosis or so. So this is one way to protect the individual. Similar like in Google Maps or in Waze Maps or whatever navigation you use, and you look at the traffic, you see that's red, there's a lot of traffic. You're not interested in the behavior of one individual car. It's just an aggregated display of where is a lot of traffic. And this is also what real-world evidence is interested in populations. How do people with the same diagnosis experience their disease? What symptoms do they have? What therapies do they get? And all this kind of population level. Another point is, which is often discussed, is, oh, these are my data. This is my blood. This is my diagnosis, my X-ray. And someone makes profit by selling my data to the pharmaceutical industry. We have to consider, what does it mean, my data? If I go to the doctor today and I get a blood sample taken, okay, that's the blood sample. The blood sample alone, this little vial of blood, has no informative value at all. It has to go to a laboratory. So then it goes either in a centrifuge or in a machine or something, and then a value comes out. This value alone also has not a great value, meaning the value, the number, does not have a monetary value. Value.
Right.
English language, as usual. English language. So anyway, then it goes to a doctor or to a nurse or to a nurse practitioner. They can interpret the laboratory number and can say it's something serious or it's not something serious. They combine it with their own knowledge, with their own experience, or with other information, a laboratory number with an X-ray result. And only the combination by the brain of a medical professional, suddenly it gets really a value, a really good information. So all these people, all these processes contribute to something which originally was a piece of blood, nothing else. So you cannot claim ownership of the whole electronic medical records by saying these are my values, my real world evidence numbers, because they have only because a nurse contributed, a laboratory technician contributed, a centrifuge contributed, a doctor contributed. Only by everybody kind of working on this little drop of blood makes the little drop of blood to a very, very valuable medical information. So I cannot claim that I own this, because without the nurse, without the doctor, without the machines in the laboratory, without the X-ray machine, this would be of no value. So these discussions of these are my data, I am the owner of the data, it's my decision what happens with that, this is discussed in a little bit of a possessive and extreme way. And I would hope that with talking with reasonable people, one could correct that.
And that's a fascinating way to explain it. I don't think I've ever heard that particular lens applied to it, but I very much appreciate it. So I think it's fascinating.
It makes sense, right? I mean,
yeah, it does.
My blood. If I draw my blood and try to go give it to somebody, it's not worth anything, really.
And if they pay you for it, I'd have some concern.
Yeah, just bigger problems.
Right.
It's a little bit tougher, a little bit more difficult when we talk about cells, about biologic material. I think we all know these HeLa cells, perhaps are already since 40 years, these cells coming from one individual woman are growing and growing and growing in the laboratories, and the generations and generations and generations of cells have been created. This is actual material. And one can also argue a little bit, this only can be used for profitable purposes in the pharmaceutical industry if others contribute it or use it in other experiments or so. But still, these are actual cells, actual genetic materials and proteins. And so I would not mix up the HeLa cell discussion with real-world data, electronic medical records discussions. I would keep that separate.
It's probably a wise distinction to make, and I agree there. Makes perfect sense. We're down to the last couple of minutes. where can people find your book, and give us a little bit of a
Yeah,
sneak
where
peek
can
into
you
what we can
find
expect.
something? Where can you find something these days? Always Amazon. So yeah,
Amazon.
so it's on Amazon. It's available as an ebook, as a paperback, as a hardcover. It's called Real World Evidence Unveiled, and then a subtitle Navigating the Maze of Modern Misinformation. If you only look in Amazon for real world evidence, you find already quite a lot of books, actually. There are more from the statistical and research sides, and my is a little bit more intended that also non-statisticians and non-clinical researchers and non-medical people can find it interesting for their daily life. As I said in the beginning, all this looking for the truth, looking for evidence, what happens at the FDA when a drug needs to get approval. Look for proof. Show me that it works. Show me that it is safe. The proof. We also need this way of thinking in the real world, in our daily life. A headline in the New York Post or in the New York Times, both will most likely say exactly the different things. So then look. Show me the proof, show me the evidence, show me the source. It's the same. So yeah, this is Real World Evidence Unveiled, Navigating the Maze of Modern Misinformation, and then you will find it.
Great.
I love it. We might have to do a book review episode, Denali.
I was gonna say, I'm gonna buy it. I love reading, so absolutely, you'll have it on the shelf. So
Beautiful. Yeah. Okay. As we wrap up here, any parting words you'd want to share, Dr. Stapff?
I think I have been talking so much. It's not that I have shot all my theoretical fire, but as a summary statement, I really would encourage people to not quickly overreact to a newspaper headline, to a social media 140 character story, or is it now? It's more than 140 character, I think, depending on the contract you have with X or with Truth Social or so. So don't quickly react. That's how cave people reacted 100,000 years ago. And they had to react quickly to a negative news. Oh, outside there's a snake, outside there's a lion, or outside is some animal which will eat us. So they had to immediately activate the flight reaction, had to immediately react, had to immediately tell it to the other cavemen, hey, the outside is a lion. So this is 100,000 years ago. Good news are slower. It's time. Outside is good water. Outside is a nice apple tree. Good news have time. So we do not prioritize the good news. So our whole news world is concentrated on emotional reaction to bad, dangerous news. So I would say try to overcome that. Don't behave like a caveman or cavewoman. Caveman 100,000 years ago. You should be better than that now in the year 2025.
Goals.
Very well said. I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We'll be back later this week. What do we got later this week, Denali?
It's just a sticky notes. So
okay.
We have no idea what we're talking about until
covering some topical
something.
info. So, Dr. Stapff, thank you again so much for coming on. And until next time, thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. Look at the book and look at my own podcast.
Absolutely.
All right. We'll plug you. Thank you, sir. Thanks for listening to Note to File. We're committed to continuing to bring you independent and unfiltered coverage of the clinical trial industry.
We want to talk about what you want to hear. So if you have something on your mind, hit us up at notetofilepodcast.com.